Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I want to share my thoughts on the gameplay we saw for Pictomancer from the recent Letter from the Producer Live. For me, this was the highlight of the show. While many jobs are now getting speculation and everyone's trying to piece together the fragments of information that we have so far, Pictomancer benefited from being one of the two brand new jobs and getting its own in-game showcase. Thanks to this, we have a pretty full picture of what the job will look like when it releases, or at least how it currently is in development. So I want to go over its strengths, weaknesses, my overall feelings, and of course, walk you through how the job itself actually works, and even kind of a tentative opener. There's some things we don't know about the job that make me feel like we're going to have to revisit that, but I want to give you some idea of what it might look like. So Pictomancer has three main components to its job design: Motif, Paint, and Rainbow Gauge. The latter two are directly intertwined, with Motifs serving as the job's primary source of optimization and power in its kit. For its filler spells, Pictomancer has a 3-part paint combo, and it has both a single target and AoE equivalent for any situation. Each of these spells has a short cast time of 1.5 seconds, making slide casting on your basic filler spells a bit simpler. I say they all have it. We haven't actually seen the AoE combo cast, but at the very least for your single target combo, I can say that confidently. When a combo is completed, Pictomancer gains 1 stack of white paint. This grants you access to an instant cast Painted Holy spell, great for movement, but not super high on potency. Since you can store up to 5 of these, they make for a strong movement tool for prolonged boss mechanics that require constant movement. You also get 25 Rainbow Paint for every combo you finish. 50 Rainbow Paint can be used to convert a white paint into black paint using the Rainbow Paint skill. This also allows you to cast a stronger paint magic combo while you're at it. This combo has a slightly longer cast time of 2 seconds per spell, but the potency is increased for that. The Holy Paint finisher is instead replaced by an Umbra Paint finisher as well. It's still instant cast, but deals more potency and ends this rainbow black paint phase thing you got going on. You'll want to use this combo to prevent overcapping on Rainbow Gauge, make use of times when movement requirements are minimal, or to just enhance potency during short burst phases. For example, if there's an ad phase with a lot of little ads that you can just deal more damage to and movement's not much of a factor, that's a great time to use something like this. Make sure it's tucked away, make sure you have the gauge set up, even save enough to do a couple, and I could definitely think of a few situations in old raids where this would have been useful. Optimal use of this during your filler should greatly improve your overall damage, and the combo finisher itself even generates a white paint to boot, so you end up paint neutral at the end of all of this. Now that covers our first of the 2 job gauges, but then we move over to motifs. There are 3 canvases in your job gauge: a creature motif on the left, a weapon motif in the middle, and a landscape motif on the right. There's also a little gauge above your creature motif, and that's going to be tracking your uses as you will build towards a big finisher. Drawing on these motifs has no cast time out of combat, so pre-pull you can just press all 3 of them and it'll be done real quick. But in combat, they do take a few seconds to draw. Fortunately, they can be swift casted, and even when they are hard cast, they do give you enough time to do a single weave before your GCD becomes available again. The creature motif will cycle between 4 different parts of a creature. The first 2 are Moogle parts, and after compiling both of them, you can throw out an additional line nuke with your drawn Moogle. After that, you can draw a Claw and Bite motif, after which you can summon a drawing of Medine to do even greater damage. You'll want to aim to have Medine on all the burst phases minus the opener, which should be utilizing the Moogle at minimum. Bear in mind this does have some flexibility. In some fights based on length, you may choose to throw Medine at the 1-minute mark instead and just do Moogle on the 2s, not unlike what you may see a monk doing with their Endwalker version of their perfect balances. It's definitely flexible, but that's the general goal, is to get Medine during your 2s. The actual spell you cast with the motif is called a Muse, and for the creature Muse, they have a cooldown of 40 seconds and a maximum of 3 charges that can be stored up. It looks like you'll use 2 charges in the opener at least to build the Moogle, and 1 charge in between to prevent overcapping and set up Medine for your 2s window. You do need to use the 4th one to get Medine, but I need to see potencies to see if maybe you want to try to get the last Muse in your buff window and then Medine then, or if you want to prepare it ahead of time. So it's one of those things that's still kind of tentative, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. There's also the possibility of getting a 3rd Muse in the opener, but again, there's some information that I need to confirm whether or not you'd even want to do that. Your weapon motif will draw a hammer, which upon executing the Muse will grant you access to a 3-part hammer combo, designated by a 3-stack hammer buff. This is still a ranged attack, and you have 30 seconds to spend the 3 charges once you've drawn the Muse. Every hit in the hammer combo is an instant cast GCD that always incurs a critical direct hit. You can also store up to 2 charges of the hammer muse. This is meant to work kind of like triple cast. Kind of, but not really. You never want to overcap on the charges, but you can either use them for movement or in your burst. This will be determined on a fight-to-fight basis. It adds a bit of flexibility to your 2-minute window in a couple of different ways, since you can technically use swift cast to instantly draw a second hammer motif and enter the muse for more movement, at the cost of not properly utilizing your 2-minute buff window. But that's something that again is tentative and needs to be seen before we can say more. Finally, you have your landscape motif. You'll draw this at some point every 2 minutes to activate your landscape muse, giving your entire team a buff and summoning a landscape that provides several benefits to the Pictomancer themselves. It slightly speeds up your cast and recast times for several casts, grants you access to 1 free use of your rainbow paint conversion, taking a white paint and making it a black paint, and upon casting 5 spells within the landscape, you are granted 1 free use of your Pride Tunnel AoE attack. No, it's not actually called the Pride Tunnel, but someone in my chat called it that, and I really like it. The Pride Tunnel AoE is a line nuke with an incredibly long cast time when it's not procced. You'll use this as your opening spell as it instantly generates 1 white paint and has a super high potency, but otherwise you'll likely only use it in this 2-minute buff window. I wouldn't be surprised to see some tech come out where you can swift cast it for extended movement phases, but with Hammer and Holy Paint, I feel like that would have to be like a real last resort thing to do. A situation where you have to swift cast the Pride Tunnel for the extra paint and Holy on top of it. That's a lot, but you never know, it's at least an option. The Landscape Muse also grants you access to a landscape finisher, an instant cast GCD that does big damage around the target. You'll obviously use this once every 2 minutes as well. And finally, for a bit of fun, you also have a dash skill that has a fairly short cooldown. I don't think we know the name. I think somebody said in Japanese it's called Smudge, so maybe that's what it'll be called in NA, but I like to call it Splatoon Avant for the time being. Splatoon Avant even gives you bonus movement speed for a few seconds after using it, so pretty primo movement skill for a caster. Now for the opener and reopener, there's just some information that we're missing about spell interaction, so I can't say definitively that anything here is how it will actually be when it comes out. Not to mention, they could change something before it actually releases, and they've done so in the past. But I'm going to try to provide you with some idea of what you're looking to accomplish in the opener, and it's very similar to what Yoshi P was actually doing when he attempted the opener during the actual live letter. So remember to draw all of your motifs during the pre-pull. You're gonna want all of those at the start, trust me. And then about 5 seconds before the pull, you're gonna pot, and about 3 seconds before the pull starts, you're gonna wanna start the long cast Pride Tunnel spell. It hits really hard and gives you a free white paint, so you definitely wanna open any fight you can with this. You then have enough time to double weave if you're on low ping, so you can do Palm Muse plus Hammer Muse. Don't know how that's gonna work on normal to high ping, but hopefully it still works. You're then going to want to hard cast your creature motif to get to the second part in order to actually get the Moogle for your opener. Now from this point on, I'm operating under the assumption that you cannot use the hammer spell during the landscape muse without it affecting it in some way. Because you get that 5-stack buff that reduces cast and recast times, I'm worried that using it on the hammer, which is definitely not the intended way, will negatively impact your overall damage. So I'm landscape musing after the creature motif. You have enough time to do 1 single weave, but then the GCD after is a bit of a question mark. You might actually want to do 1 more GCD here before you go into the landscape muse. It's going to really depend how buff alignment actually ends up working with a Pictomancer in the party. But let's assume we do what's on screen. You do the creature motif into the off global landscape muse, immediately into the finisher. That's why I'm nervous. I don't know if all buffs are going to be up, and that is your hardest hitting ability. You definitely want to make sure that that lands properly inside of your buff window, because your only other real option is to then maybe hard cast another paint spell, and in your opener you don't really have a spare white paint, so it'd just be a regular GCD, and then you'd have to get Wing Muse and Rainbow Paint out anyway, so it just makes the most sense to go right for the landscape finisher here, so you can then weave into the Rainbow Paint. You can then do your Rainbow Paint combo with Blizzard Stone Thunder, but you don't really have any time to weave there. When you get to the Black Paint ability, you can then unleash the Wing Muse off global that you saved up from earlier in your opener, and then you'll use the Pride Tunnel into the Moogle Beam, and finally wrap up with those 3 Hammer GCDs before all of the buffs wear off. Something about that seems like that's almost like what the game almost expects you to do. Like, I think Yoshi P did almost exactly this thing. He messed it up a little bit, so like the buff alignment was kind of messed up. But I don't know, I look at that and I go, there are ways to make that, I think, look better, to align better, to make sure the higher potency stuff is more I guess easily inside of buffs. And I wonder if you could do some like fanciness with Swift Cast in here. Like, I guess what you could do potentially is Swift Cast another motif at the end, whether it's a creature motif in order to do the Claw Muse now, if you can land that during some sort of buff. You know, at that point, I think they should all be gone. Or maybe you could Swift Cast the other Hammer Muse and then, you know, or the Hammer motif, and then save the Muse, or you could use it immediately if it's like a really intense movement phase right off the bat, or if there's like a short-term phase where you're going to have a bunch of downtime after, maybe something like, you know, first phase and DSR. There's a lot of possibilities there at the very end. But man, if you can do the Hammer motif earlier and you can use that to kind of, you know, put off the landscape finisher to a safer spot, that would definitely open up a lot more possibilities. And I think that's important information to have for the 2-minute window as well. Think about it. If you're in the middle of a 2-minute window doing something like Super Chain, there's actually quite a lot of hard casts here. So would you, instead of even doing the hard casted paint combo, wouldn't you just want to do a double hammer combo? You know, use the hammer, Swift Cast, weapon motif, hammer again. That just makes the most sense to me. So I have a feeling the hammer spell is not going to impact the stacking buff that you get from the Landscape Muse. Thus, you can actually use it for movement while in your 2s and, you know, not feel like you have to, you know, choose one or the other. I'm just really hoping that that's how it ends up working when we get the full job, because that is much more interesting than this. And, you know, if that isn't how it works, that's how it probably should be working. I mean, think about it. If you manage to, let's say you could do that, you could probably pot, instead of potting like in pre-pull, you could probably pot a little bit later, and then that actually makes more sense, because then you could get an extra creature motif in at the end, or again, you could get the extra Hammer Muse in at the end in order to do the combo, and you can get a lot more out of a pot window that way. It might just be that your opener, because you only have the 1 white paint, you're kind of maybe forced to pot pre-pull, but your pot during the other windows might be more interesting, your 2-minute windows and whatnot, because you might be able to like flow from like a hammer combo into your landscape, into another hammer combo, into the motifs. Like, I think the 2-minute, 4-minute, 6-minute windows, etc., are going to be a lot more interesting and a lot less static. And that's good, because the job should, as a caster, have plenty of options for navigating that 2-minute window, especially as a job that has a mix of tons of instant casts as well as a handful of very, very long casts. So very excited to see the optimization, but I don't think it'll be that complicated. I think it only seems even a little complicated because we're missing those little bits of information. And once your opener is finished, or I guess between any of your burst windows, you're basically going to be managing your white paint and rainbow gauge in respect to whatever fight you're doing. You know, look for windows to convert into rainbow paint for more damage, make sure you don't overcap, and ensure to save enough white paints for any movement intensive sections in between bursts. I think that's going to be probably one of the more important things, but I don't think that's going to be that difficult. You know, you just do 3 buttons and then you have white paint. I think you can then hold on to it for a long enough period of time to move if you need to. You'll also want to ensure to redraw all of your motifs repeatedly. You could use Swift Cast on them, and again, especially for movement tools, Swift Casting a motif is certainly a good idea, but you have kind of like a minimum responsibility regardless of Swift Cast availability. You know, the creature motif will overcap if not maintained, and you want to ensure that your 2-minute buff windows have Medine in most fights. I think, mention earlier that you have the flexibility of moving Medine to your 1-minute and like 3-minute bursts, your odd minute bursts, instead of 2s if fight length is a concern, which tends to happen on door bosses more than anything else. It just means that you would Moogle during your burst windows instead, and honestly, that'll probably be okay. You'll also want to ensure you're using your weapon motif once per minute at minimum. I mean, it depends. Again, if we do the double hammer opener, it means that you're not expecting to move for quite some time, or at least to not have anything that's too movement intensive. But that seems like such a risk to me. You know, yeah, that's like the cool, like, oh, look how much damage I did kind of thing. But it seems more likely that, again, you'll treat it a little bit more like triple cast for movement movement. Since the opener is only going to use one stack, you'll have that spare stack at all times in case there's any prolonged movement between burst phases. So right alongside how you would be using the Holy Paint and potentially even the Rainbow Gauge. And finally, the landscape motif, you just have to remember to draw it once every 2 minutes. I don't care if you swift cast it. I don't know what the play is. You're going to hope that there's a downtime phase where there's a good time to do it. But if you're also just in the middle of generating white paint, just draw it again at some point, as long as it's not going to be at a bad time. Don't get me wrong, there's probably bad times to do it, but just draw it once so it's ready. Do not forget to draw the landscape motif. And yeah, I would go into reopeners and whatnot, but again, I need to know those interactions because otherwise it probably looks very similar to your opener. And no matter what, it seems like the intention is you'll use the landscape muse to get the free Rainbow Gauge and go through that combo into the Pride Tunnel spell. I'm hard pressed to imagine a situation where you don't aim for that, but it's gonna depend on the boss. Some bosses are not going to let you stand even in that big field. I mean, you might have to maybe pre-position and drop the landscape in a location where you're going to be doing a lot of movement, or strategies with Pictomancers may want to utilize that. You always have Splatoon Avant to get back to it if you want to use it sort of as a spread position, because you don't have anything between the lines otherwise to get back to it. There's just a lot of possibilities, and I think that's about as much comfort as I'm willing to say I have discussing an actual rotation for the job. Now, I think one of the biggest pros of what we saw is the job has tons of personality and identity. I didn't really know what they were going to do with it. I was very intrigued when they revealed they were going to be doing Pictomancer. And it screams uniqueness. People can argue about the visuals of it, the cartooniness of it a little bit. I personally think that it's really cool looking, and it looks like it has a lot of very neat effects, very identifying effects to the job itself. And I don't take that as a negative because they're drawn. They look like they're drawn. So job identity, a big one, but I also like their mix of use of all of their gauges. Pretty much everything they have is involved with a gauge in some way. And I like the way that they interact. There's some really, really basic stuff for you to manage while you're in between your buff windows. Nothing too major. You just got to make sure to generate the paint, use it for movement. It's easy to understand, easy to approach, and hopefully quite rewarding to actually play. But then the motifs have this sort of pre-plannedness to them that also have a flexibility that we very often struggle to see when it comes to this 2-minute meta that we do appear to be continuing on as we go through. Now, of course, we don't have all the job information yet. We're only going based off a bunch of general statements that we got from the letter from the producer live, but Picto looks like it'll fit right in. The problem with those pros is that its singular biggest con is one that is going to likely leave it scrutinized, and that is the lack of a combat raise. Yes, the job is incredibly mobile. Between Splatoon Avant, the instant cast you can save up, the hammer spell, swift cast only being 40 seconds, it's good, but Black Mage is also looking to be even more mobile based on what we saw in the job action trailer. Red Mage looks like it even has some better options now. And Summoner is Summoner. So it's I can't really count that too much. And we don't know what its actual damage will be compared to the other jobs. So when you don't have a raise as a caster, we have seen it time and time again. It just becomes harder to get picked up, especially if you were to happen to be a Picto one trick. Now, maybe they design raids where the raises aren't as good. They've been doing that a lot with the more difficult raids where suffering a wipe is not just, oh, res that person real quick and let's get it before the next mechanic. A lot of the times it's too late. By the time they die literally moments before they need to be alive because of the pacing of the mechanics. And while I don't think they'll do that for the very first tier, I think just even the notion of that being a thing should be enough to maybe warrant giving Pictomancers in the PF or in your static a try. But there's always going to be that same. It's like double melee. People are very afraid to run double caster, even though double caster has been used for a lot of things. On top, double caster was ultra punished, and in regular PF, people just don't perceive it as the go-to option. So Picto is kind of picking up that same slack Black Mage is, where people just go, oh, it doesn't have a raise, then I don't want it. And I'm so concerned about that. It's why I'm keeping raise on Summoner and Red Mage, while I think is really good for casual content, is a bit riskier for end game content. If they make some sort of adjustment to raise availability in harder content, then maybe that helps out with things like Pictomancer and Black Mage being picked. But without that raise, that is the chief con. I'll also say that in terms of people looking for something more button intensive, this isn't looking to be that much more than some of the other jobs. You're probably still looking at maybe picking one of the other casters, even post consolidation stuff they're going to be doing. If you're looking for something that's a bit more involved, especially the filler phases look to be ultra basic here. So I guess those would be the two cons: no raise and a very, very basic filler phase, even if you are working towards that mobility and rainbow gauge and all that stuff in between. But I think it'll at least be maybe a little more fun than summoner filler. Maybe. Overall, though, I was surprised at how much more I liked seeing Pictomancer than Viper. I really thought I was going to see Viper and be like, whoa, that's crazy. But this job just has so much personality, and I'm one of those players where that definitely matters a lot. They're going to be a job that's sometimes a little frustrating to play. It's got its quirks, but when I'm playing it, like, it's just something about it, just like it triggers something in my mind that just gives me dopamine hits, and having that strong job identity is definitely one of those things. And in this case, I think it would supersede whether or not the gameplay is ultra involved or engaging. So I don't know. I'm kind of drawn to it. I'm not going to get to raid on it like for the first tier. I might pick it up and mess around with it in between tiers, or maybe take it into, VNC stuff that comes out this expansion, exploration stuff this expansion. We'll see. But I think it looks fun and like a great addition that just fits right into the rest of the cast of Final Fantasy XIV. Good to see Realm from Final Fantasy VI getting that representation, and excited to see how the rest of the player base receives the job and enjoys the job when it actually comes out. And when we have more information. Like I said, we're still missing a lot of stuff that we don't know just from their showcase. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for my video on Pictomancer. Let me know what you thought in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned. We'll be doing a bunch of breakdowns of the information that are more specialized, and maybe take into account some opinions of some of the experts in those roles as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.